Oh, great. It's my turn to speak. Okay. I apologize first off for anybody viewing who has problems with my camera. It looks like somebody smeared Vaseline all over it, and that was from the last orgy I had. It was crazy. It was crazy. And I'd like to thank my opponent, Ben Mouse, here for joining me, because we talked for a few moments before just to kind of get to know each other. Seems like it's going to be fun. The first thing I start with is just, I guess I have, there's time limits for the turns now. That's cool. All right. My little brother is actually in Special Forces. And as somebody who's in Special Forces in the military, he's very, very proficiently trained on every kind of weapon, just about. And even weapons that I have asked him about, because I'm trying to figure out what's out there that I don't already know about. I asked him before this debate if there was anything specific I should mention. You know, any place he's been, any instance that he's felt like having a weapon would have been a huge advantage, and not just a situation where having a weapon would be an advantage, but a situation where he wasn't able to. And he said when he was in Eastern Europe, I can't mention any more specifics than this because of what he does, but when he was in Eastern Europe, he was not allowed to carry a concealed weapon off base. And that is something that they're not usually comfortable with doing, because when you are trained to essentially defend yourself and carry out pretty precise attacks, you are used to having a weapon on you at all times. And because you're also used to being essentially threatened, like your entire life is at stake all the time. So he carries a concealed weapon everywhere. And while he was in Eastern Europe, he wasn't able to carry a weapon. And he said while he was out, and this is a country with one of the most strict gun laws in Europe, and while he was there, he wasn't allowed to carry a weapon, but yet he saw somebody running away from the scene of a crime with a weapon. And he wasn't able to do anything about that. So he's like, I'm sitting there thinking to myself, man, if I had a weapon, not that I would shoot the person, but at least I would feel safer. Maybe if that person tried to hijack my car and I was sitting in it, I would have a weapon to defend myself. So what I would say is that people like my sibling, I feel a lot safer when I'm with him and a concealed weapon, because I know his training and I know how much he cares about making sure that when he does fire it, it's important, and that it isn't at anybody who could possibly get hurt. So I know that your arguments are going to be about people not being trained enough, or mental health, or background checks, and all that stuff. And I'll agree with you on most of it. I'm sorry to kill most of this debate for you, because I'm going to agree with you on probably 90% of it. But I'd like to say that just it's good to have a gun when you know how to use it. And I'll let the mic just automatically.
All right. Can you hear me? Is this give me a good old nod? All right, sick. So look, the first thing I'd like to say is that I don't think you've actually really given us an active shooter situation. Like what you talked about was some guy is running out of the scene of the crime and I would have felt safer. Well, like, to be frank, I agree. You'll feel safer, but you won't be. So I don't actually care how people feel, to be honest. If they are safer, but they don't feel as safe, that's totally fine for me. I'll count that as a win. I've got 4 reasons, see if I can cram it into 2 reasons why I don't like this. The first is the ones you predicted. People aren't trained. People aren't your brother in little special forces. People in America at the moment, which is where this is most likely to come out, because it's got the most active shooting crimes and it's also got the most people with the guns to defend themselves, is where people are getting their guns in parts of deals with their bank at Walmart. They don't require any training. Like, I admit that some will, but it doesn't take many idiots to make this, to blow the situation out of control. And what all I'm saying there is, I reckon lots of people could try and like intervene in a positive way, but I don't know what their aiming's like. I don't know what their gun's like. Many people buy their guns for purely aesthetic reasons, which, they've got no, idea of what the recoil's like. They don't train at the range very much. Who knows if they're going to shoot someone else by accident? That doesn't sound safer to me. Second point, I think that active shooter situations appear on a spectrum, right? So you've got some guy who walks into a robbery, points his gun at the roof, shoots and says, "I'm serious. Anyone who does anything here is going to die." That's an active shooter. Now, if someone else pulls out their gun, you can be sure that that will turn into a much, much more deadly active shooting situation. If that person knows that they are the only person there with a gun, which is exactly how it happens in Australia, anyone who tries to commit crimes with guns knows that they are the only person there. They have no reason to engage. They don't have any reason to act preemptively. When people move shiftily, they're not like, holy moly, this could be me dead. They know that they're in control. And I actually, to be honest, think if someone's trying to rob a store, let them get away with whatever the hell it is. It's not worth someone's life. Third reason, police. I think that the one of the biggest things of active shooter situations is that you need, when the police show up, which they always will, right? Like, because you want them to. Someone's going to call the police. You want, when the police show up, for them to be absolutely sure who the criminal is. And having the criminal be the only person with the gun is a dead giveaway, which means that when, you know, the situation does go to be resolved, it's better that the police don't show up and everyone's pointing guns at each other and it's impossible to tell who the shooter is. Like it's a high intensity situation. You don't know what they've been told. Like, they've given some rough description, tall white male, probably. What if there are 5 tall white males wearing guns? Who do they shoot first if it comes to that? So that's going to be much worse for resolving the situation. And fourth and final reason is that having more guns in the room, like lots of shooters actually get stopped after they've unloaded their clip and they're out of ammo, because active shooters don't tend to like carry around buckets of ammunition with them. The easiest way for them to reload safely is to just pick up someone's gun who they've shot and keep it going on the killing spree. And I believe there was a few situations where that's happened. So it's better if, like, once they're out of bullets, there's no more guns, they're out of bullets, and end of the shooting spree. So safer and
Woo! You really poured through that. I am trying to keep up. Let's see here. I hope I didn't just accidentally. Okay, I did. All right. Let's go back through those points. I'm going to try and go in reverse. The active shooters, the fact that the people who are carrying concealed weapons don't usually carry a lot of ammo. That's actually a really good point. But then again, you have to understand that the weapons that people are carrying to carry out these things are not usually handguns. And so the ammo usually won't fit. The magazine definitely won't fit. So that point is pretty much moot. The fact that they'll just pick up the gun and then continue shooting, I've found, this is just a personal thing, this isn't based on any studies, but I found that everybody I know who carries a concealed weapon permit knows what they're doing and has a very, very good shot. Most people who take the time to actually get their concealed weapon, because it's not as simple as just, like, it's harder to get a prescription for medical marijuana in California than it is to get a concealed weapons permit. And that's a good thing. It's a good thing that you can't just, you know, smoke pot and carry a weapon just as easily. So I think that a lot of the people who carry a weapon also have to think about the price of it and getting background checks for it, because those you do have those. And a lot of people aren't necessarily thinking about going around the system to try to get a weapon that isn't traceable or anything like that, or that they have a background that can't get them a weapon. The police, who do you shoot? Well, in an active shooter situation, normally when something like this happens, there's a really good example of, I think it was in Texas. I'm trying to actually find it, but it's hard to do the research. Texas, there was a guy who started shooting people from a gun tower, the Bell Tower sniper. It was Charles Whitman. I think that's who it was. And the only thing that kept this guy back was people who had their own weapons who were firing back at him, because he was in a sniper's nest on top of buildings, and he essentially had 360-degree view of everything. He could just shoot people at free will. And the only thing that kept him from killing more people was the fact that there was people firing back at him from the ground that were more often than not citizens. I think that if you look back with hindsight is 50-50, of course. But if you look back at hindsight with like the Paris shooting or the Orlando club shooting, those instances, or even the one most recently in Istanbul, if you look at those shootings, if somebody would have been trained to carry a weapon and shoot it, because that's the person that I'm defending, the person who's trained to shoot it. If a person who's trained to shoot their weapon had one at the scene, that would not have been as bad as it was. There would have been less people who had died, and the shooter probably wouldn't have gotten away. At the very least, he'd been injured. It's hard to address all these points, but it's your turn.
All right, cool. Okay, so first point. So you were like, my point's moot because the ammo won't fit the right cartridge. So my point wasn't that they're literally going to pick up spare ammo and reload. My point was that they're going to pick up another gun and reload, and just use a newly loaded gun. Because as you said, right, like once they're out of ammo, the shooting spree is over. So on that point, it's not that they're going to reload with new ammo. It's just that they're going to have a new gun. Second point there that you said, though, is that people don't usually carry handguns. And I'm going to say that that's probably I just think it's a bit of a blanket assumption, right? Like there are lots of different active shooter scenarios. A guy who just goes into the store to rob, yeah, why not have a handgun? If someone wants to sneak a gun into a theater, right, it probably is something which they can conceal. Like no one's going to carry like a huge AK and just be like, yeah, I just like to watch movies with my AK, you know? So they're usually going to carry a gun which can be concealed. That to me says it's going to be on the smaller side. So it seems logical that maybe sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes it could be a handgun. Okay, next thing you were saying was police. Okay, what if the police shoot the wrong person? Now, look, I'm going to be honest here. I actually think you started to address this point, but then stopped addressing it because then you started telling me about this bell tower story. So at this stage, I haven't yet got a response as to how the police are supposed to identify the criminal properly if everyone has a gun, not one person. So, I mean, yeah, I'll take a response for that in the next bout, I suppose. The thing you did say, though, which is, so this is a new point you've brought up, is doesn't this disincentivize shooters from going like the next step when they're in that scenario? The first thing I like to say is that shooters who are actually out there to kill people and kill as many people as possible is only one subset of active shooter scenarios. Many active shooter scenarios are just there because they want to rob a store or they want to kill one particular person, or like, you know, in the case of like gang active shooter scenarios and stuff like that, they're not interested in shooting everyone until they die, right? So in all the other cases, it is much, much, much better that they just are allowed to do their thing and scram. At the point where they feel threatened, like someone else could shoot them, that's when they feel like they have to shoot everyone because there's no other option or they'll die. For the subset of people you're talking about, right, like the guy in the bell tower, I just don't understand what holding the bell tower guy back means. Is he going to like pick up the bell tower and run it after people? Like, the world I'm talking about is one in Australia where some guy gets in a bell tower and everyone runs the fuck away from the bell tower and just stays behind cover. Not a whole lot of wannabe G.I. Joes sitting behind their cars and popping out to shoot. And that's what actually causes the risk of people's death. So I don't understand what there is to disincentivize the bell tower guy. Like, you know, what I envisage is that he gets in his bell tower, he tries to shoot as many people as possible, but everyone runs straight away. And then when the police show up, they know exactly who it is who's shooting because he's the only person with a gun. And and if he wants to run after people, I mean, good luck. He's got to crawl all the way down the bell tower. And by that stage, I think he's given everyone a pretty good head start. But yeah, that's it. I've got, what else was there? You didn't tell me, you didn't really address my escalation point, I suppose, but you know, I do talk real fast. So anyway, your turn.
All right, yeah, this whole 6 points thing is really difficult for me because I'm not able to. I don't have a whole lot of points to make, but I'm not able to really make points because I'm responding to all of them. Concealed weapons being small, no, I'm sorry. As somebody who was in the military, I can conceal an M16 and not make it look like I'm carrying anything. So no, it's not hard at all to actually hide a weapon. And I would love to hear about any mass shootings that you've heard about where there's a pistol involved, because that just doesn't fucking happen. I know that you think I'm blanket statementing things, but I can't think of a single instance where they're like, oh, there was a shooting at a nightclub or anything like that, where they're like, oh, 50 people were killed and the person was using a handgun. That just doesn't happen. As far as the shooter having another gun, again, my point immediately after making the point that the people who have these weapons generally are people, at least in my experience, and I asked my my sibling and my family who, you know, how many people that you know who are special forces also carry concealed weapons. He said over 90%. So over 90% of, you know, the people that he knows that are special forces carry weapons concealed. That makes me feel safe as shit. I don't know about you, but I feel safe as hell knowing that 90% of the special forces that he's worked with carry weapons, because I know that if I'm in an active shooter situation and one of them has a weapon, I'm going to be safe. I mean, I may be injured, but I'd be a hell of a lot safer than I would be. And I've been in situations where he's had his concealed weapon and I felt safe just knowing that, you know, he knows how to use it. And if something were to happen, I would be protected. And so an active shooter coming in and shooting up, let's say, let's use the Orlando club, that person is not going to, because they came in with rounds. So that, like you said, they came prepared. So they're not going to need to pick up another weapon. The fact that they would stop to pick up a weapon and leave themselves vulnerable is really, really unlikely. I mean, and the fact that the person might not be dead, it's usually just in a kind of manic, just shooting frenzy. It isn't usually something where they're like, ooh, another gun. Oh, I can change things up now. So I don't think that thinking that, oh, well, this is just another gun for them to pick up. The bell tower, you were saying, why didn't people just, you know, why didn't they just run away and hide? Well, this was town square. And this was before there was, you know, mainstream media, before there was any real news. So somebody could have just been riding their bike into the tower and they would not see many people and they could just walk in. And this, like I said, I believe this was in the 30s, 37 or something like that. So this was before people had a way of really knowing what was going on. And you said, well, how would the police know? Well, the police aren't stupid. They know that the one person up in the tower that everybody's shooting at is the bad guy.
All right. Yeah, sorry about the tons of points things. I do a lot of debating, so I'm used to this, like, you know, people who's bombarding each other. I'll take a bit of time to address your points. The first thing which, like, to be honest, the first thing which I think is majorly wrong with your conception of this debate is that you are conceiving of active shooter scenarios as being like perfectly encapsulated in the Venn diagram of mass shootings, right? So a lot of the stuff you're talking about is true of mass shootings, but definitely not true of all of the active shooter scenarios which we can think of. So for example, right, like the one I listed earlier, where a guy is trying to rob a store, puts his gun up in the air and he shoots to kind of, yeah. So it's all right. You'll address it next time, I imagine. Yeah. So I can't hear what you're saying. Sorry. So your frustration is a bit pointless. So for example, is it always an automatic weapon? Probably not if they're trying to rob a store. There's no need for it. I mean, maybe there is, but maybe there isn't. So a lot of that stuff like snipers less, people trying to kill as many people as possible, that is not all active shooter scenarios. And if you disagree, if you wanted the debate to be about mass shooters, I mean, we can transition, but it is more favored for your side. I still think I can win it though. Okay. The second thing you were talking about is people feeling safe, and you referenced your own feeling of safety a lot. I actually think that you don't really know what it's like in the other world. And let me tell you this, you know, as someone from Australia, the fact that you even think about mass shootings shows that there's a stark difference in the degree of safety you feel to the degree of safety which people feel in Australia. Many people in Australia, unless they follow US news, haven't even heard of a mass shooting. So it's not even, I feel safe if this happens. They don't even feel that it could happen. They're like, why would anyone do this? How could anyone do this? So the feeling of safety which you feel, I don't think it doesn't exist, but I think that you've got no idea how much more unsafe it is than living in a society where people know. And there are shootings in Australia, by the way. Like there are gangs, right? There are crime people who get the guns illegally. But the fact that there is no one ever shooting back, and the fact that those incidents are so few and far between, it's an unparalleled feeling of safety, which is much safer than what you've got. The next thing I'd say is just quickly with the point to the police. So basically your response was, look, the police aren't dumb, so they know who's the shooter because they're the only one in the bell tower. I agree, police aren't dumb. And if it is someone in a bell tower, it's obvious. But I think police are often put in very, very difficult situations with not much notice. Like if the active shooting thing comes through the line, they don't get a full-on analytic briefing of what's happening. They just told where to go, what the guy looks like, and what the situation is. And we've seen how often in America police act, you know, like overreact. And to be honest, I don't blame them. You know, it sucks to be like, you're going to be thrown into this awful situation. But that's the sort of high-intensity, stress-filled environment which would be helped by not an army of people shooting at each other, but just one clear target to make it easier.
All right. God, this is a difficult debate. I'm glad this isn't one of the tournament debates because fuck. Again, I'm not used to doing. I love debating, but when there's a 3-minute window that we're going at, and I'm responding to 90% and only saying my own, I didn't even get to respond to everything. So you were talking about how the majority of these shootings aren't mass shootings. I agree, and that was actually one of the points I'd written down. I just couldn't get to it. I think that the point of that is, yeah, that happens. And there's somebody who's like, give me the money. I just want what's in the register. And having a shooter there might necessarily make things worse. But then again, I'd ask for you to provide me one example where that's true. I'm not saying that there isn't, but I'm saying that I think that you are providing this to me with your own emotional bias right now. Because as you say, I think that you have this sense of comfort as an American who's got their guns and their sausages. I think that you assume that I have this sense of comfort. I've been homeless in the streets of Jacksonville, which is one of the most dangerous cities in the country to live in. I've, been in crack neighborhoods where one of my neighbors was a crack dealer and the other neighbor was just another dealer. I don't know what they sold, but I never felt like I was in danger just being in those situations. And I don't feel like I'm in danger in the situations I was describing. I don't even think about the mass shooter situation. It's just when I'm in church and my brother pulls up his van and just goes, I've got us protected just in case. I'm like, wow, okay. Yeah, I didn't even think about that. But it's not even that you don't feel safe. It's just the fact that there are people who are trained that are carrying without even you knowing. And there's situations like that that I guarantee you they evaluate and they make sure that if something were like that to happen, you know, somebody's just robbing a gas station and there's a bunch, you know, there's 6 or 7 people in the gas station or there's one shooter up at the front, I don't think most people would engage. And I think that the only reason they would is if they felt like they had to. So I think you're straw manning a lot of these situations and saying, well, I think that these people shouldn't, you know, endanger other people by doing this, and then making it more difficult for the police to decide who's the real villain. I mean, the police may come to a situation and not know who the perpetrator is, but I guarantee you, whoever made the 911 call probably told them. And if they didn't tell them and they just said, I heard a gun, and they go up to somebody, the person who's an active shooter will not just drop their weapon when being told to. And it won't be like a stereotypical movie scene where there's one person holding a gun to the other person. They go, I'm not the bad guy. He's the bad guy. No, he's the bad guy. I feel like these are like cartoonish representations of real life situations. And I'd like to know if you would feel more safe in a situation like that.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So okay. The first thing I'd like to quickly address is, look, when you said I have an emotional bias, I think it's a bit of an ad hominem, you know? What if I said, will you have the emotional bias and you don't know how it's coloring yours? Like, we're all biased, mate, in one way or another. I grew up in a country on the other side of the world. The norms and expectations I have are different to yours, and that's fine, you know? If you reckon that there's a particular type of bias which is influencing my particular argument in a particular way, let me know, right? And I'll be correct. But absent that, it just seems like a bit of a blanket. Don't believe everything this Aussie's saying, you know? He might be a bit biased. First thing I'm going to address is the safety point, which you brought up. So basically what you referred to is when you're with your brother in church and he pulls up his jacket, you see the gun and that makes you feel safe. But that's because that's your brother and you know that he's trained and you know that he's using it for a good reason. What if I'm the person sitting next to you and I don't know you? I've never met you. I just go to church with you. Am I supposed to feel safer? And I think that, well, you're saying, maybe you say, well, yes, but I reckon that in America at the moment, the climate you've got where a church was literally shot up because of the people who are inside it, I reckon there's a lot of people who wouldn't feel safe. I reckon there's a lot of people who feel, well, is this going to be the next Dylan Roof? You know, and I don't blame them, to be honest, because it's been so much in the news. And my point wasn't that you don't feel safe. My point isn't that you don't feel as safe as you would have if you grew up in Australia, because you'd never have encountered a situation. There hasn't been a shootout in an Australia, like, I can't remember the last time there was an actual shootout because people never have to worry about that. The next thing which you were addressing is, look, the police issue. When you're saying, look, the police go in with more information than you're characterizing. I just want to know how, right? Because just explain to me the situation by which the police can perfectly identify who the original shooter was. I'm going to be very charitable. I'm going to say that the police is called. The person who's calling the police knows the person who's shooting. They let them know their name. They let them know what they look like. But when that comes through on the police radio, they don't know personally who that person is. They just know that there is a shooting situation, someone is shooting, and a rough description. And lots of people look the same. I could say it's you, it's the guy in the red sweater. What if another guy has a red sweater on? Or what if it's a guy's got a beige sweater and all the police see are like 2 people with guns? It makes it comparatively harder. It would be easier if there was only one clear target. The last point you said was, look, when I was talking about escalation, and you've addressed this point now that, well, look, I reckon, and basically your point was, if they know what they're doing, they won't engage. First point, that's very generous, right? Not all people know what they're doing. But second point, that seems to be oddly concessionary, right? Because you're saying it would be better if they didn't engage. You know what guarantees them not engaging? They're not having a gun. So what the policy I'm supporting is one where people are never given the choice. They're just forced into the right choice. And the policy you're supporting is one where you are leaving it on, like, to a panic-stricken public to make the right choice.
Jesus fuck! Oh my God! Yeah, this is difficult. This is a good debate. If anybody watching, I'm enjoying this. God, there's so many points. Okay, so what's my bias? My bias is that I can't stand people with a bias. My bias is that I was raised in a home where people worshipped George Bush's shit, and I didn't like him, and so I don't have a bias. I mean, I know I do, but at the same time, I really try not to. My whole goal is not to, because I don't believe I'll ever evolve as a person intellectually if I don't acknowledge them and try to get rid of them. You were raised in a country where, as you said yourself, almost verbatim, I never had to worry about shooters. We never had to worry. We never had to think about that. Well, it's great. I mean, you probably don't live in a country with, 14% of its population being totally illiterate. I think that, yeah, well, Aboriginals. Ha! Aboriginal joke. Okay, I'm going to hell for that one. I think that it's absolutely insane that you try to compare Australia to America, because it's apples to oranges. I mean, like you said, you've never had to worry about that. You can't remember the last mass shooting you guys have had. Legitimate points. You guys don't have to worry about that stuff. Now, do I think that's because you have gun laws that you have? Fuck no. I think that it's a much deeper conversation that gets into our media and how we glorify shooters and how people deal with frustration. And I think it's a very difficult conversation and a very long one. I don't think it's as simple, oh, it's this, it's guns, or it's gun laws. It's not that simple. This has nothing to do with my feelings. This has absolutely nothing to do with my feelings. You keep bringing them up, but my feelings don't matter to me or anyone else. So I just like to say that how I feel is just what I'm stating. I don't give a shit if somebody feels uncomfortable knowing that my sibling has a concealed weapons. Like, I don't care. If it makes me feel safe and it makes them feel unsafe, I don't give a shit. The fact that he has the right to do that, as you said, that people might not engage. Well, what's the better way to do that? Well, how about having them have no weapon? It's like how Christians deal with abstinence in the US. Well, these boys are fucking all these women. If only they didn't have those penises. Maybe if we could remove the penises, they wouldn't have sex. We're thinking one step ahead. I just think that it deals with a problem with a hammer when really you need a screwdriver. You're just dealing it with it way, way too strictly. God, I'm not going to be able to get to half my points. Who at this point, Dylan Roof, I was stating that, you said, well, what if somebody next to you, has a gun and you don't think that? Dylan Roof didn't attend that church. He was not a part of that church. He never been to that church before. You were comparing somebody that I knew to somebody who'd never been.
All right. So, okay. First thing to clear up with the bias stuff. Like, look, I'm not interested in debating biases, to be real. Like, when you're like, aha, you're biased because you're in Australia. Like, the reason I know about mass shootings is because I watch so much American news. It's sickening. And so I've acquainted myself, if you will, with the mindset you're talking about. What I'm talking about, like illiteracy rates, like there are plenty of poor people in Redfern who are illiterate. What I'd like to say here is that just like keep in mind that you have to view things comparatively, right? Because I can believe you when you say that you feel safe, and I agree with you. I'm not saying that you don't feel this. What I'm saying is that you've got to compare the way you feel to the way other people would feel in a different situation. And what I'm saying is, again, I can't hear you, mate. So just say it in your minute. So what I'm saying is, in a different context, people would feel safer if they knew that when one person started shooting, that wouldn't turn into a shootout and they could get caught in the crossfire. They just know I can just run and I'm going to be right. So, or just knowing that there are less guns to begin with. Okay, so on another kind of like broad debating issue, I feel like we are backsliding a little bit into we're backsliding a little bit into like the gun rights debate in total. I actually don't personally agree that a total ban on guns is the right solution. What I'm saying is that people feel like, I'm talking about, is it better if there are more or less guns in an active shooter situation, right? So in an active shooter situation, if I know, right, that it's not going to turn into a total shootout, right, like then that would make me feel safer, possibly safer than you. And it's, hard to weigh feelings up against each other, but I guess just be comparative, I suppose, is the question there. So with the last question then, what if they engage? So look, I can theoretically win this debate by just saying removing people's rights totally would make people safer. That doesn't mean it's the right thing to do, which is a crucial difference, right? Because you were saying, aha, it's hitting like a nail with a hammer. As long as it fills the criteria of makes people safer, that is the criteria by which this debate is being judged. Not does it make people feel safer, and carefully balance that against their rights and carefully take into consider all other countries' externalities, right? So I can actually agree with you that that this safer feeling in an active shooter situation isn't worth it, but it's still safer. Does that make sense? So as in, I can say, yeah, look, it makes people feel safer, but that's totally not worth it compared to all of the other rights people might not have. So I'm pro-gun rights, even if it makes us less safer in active shooter situations. But for the purpose of this debate, right, where the criteria is, are people safer in this scenario, I can fully say, look, yep, if there weren't that many guns, if it was just the one person, they just robbed what they want and left, people would feel safer, even if it wasn't worth all the other rights trade-offs, and that would be enough to win this particular debate.
Well, I'm amazed that you have the confidence, the arrogance, the smug attitude that you believe that you could win this debate merely by saying I'd strip people of their rights. That's impressive. That sounds like the Democrats with slavery. I mean, kudos. I don't think that you would accomplish peace by ripping away guns. I think that the criminals who, this is essentially what the drug war has shown us, that people who you make something illegal for, they'll find a way to get it. And then you're just taking it away from law-abiding citizens, people who actually obey the law and take gun training courses and care about their safety or just want to hunt or just shoot. So I think that you saying, I could win this debate by saying having more people safe, I think that at least half the country would disagree with that, if not more. I think more people, because I think even Democrats who are pretty liberal about this care about their gun rights. So I think that you would not win the debate, at least in America, by saying I would strip people from their rights. I think that as far as these shooting situations you keep making up, you keep assuming that they'd end up in the absolute worst situation possible. And you assume that it would end in a shootout or the police couldn't identify. And I think that your bias is that you don't seem to be able to see past your own viewpoint, which is not unlike anybody who debates almost anything. I just think it's unfortunate that you seem to see having a person there who has a weapon as a bad thing. And I think that if you keep on strawmanning every single conversation we have about this and saying that, well, what if it ends in a shootout? What if the police can't identify it? I just don't see those things. As somebody who lives in America, every time I hear about a shooting that involves somebody who had a concealed weapons permit, they ended it pretty peacefully. And a good example of that was that the guy in, I think it was Minnesota, who was going around stabbing people, and somebody with a concealed weapons permit took them down. There's many other articles about people, I can't think off the top of my head, who were able to diffuse situations with a concealed weapons permit. I'd be interested in hearing the situations where it didn't work out well, because you seem to sound like that's all there is. Like, that's all active shooter situations is if somebody has a weapon, it'll go south. And yet all I've ever heard, and it's not because I'm looking for it, it's just because I pay attention to mainstream media that I really shouldn't because it's cancer. But all of that stuff is telling me, and not just that, just independent news sources as well, that it is not the way that you're painting it out to be. I really don't think that active shooters are going to be deterred by somebody who is just sitting there unarmed. And I think that at the very least, it gives you the option of defending yourself. So we're talking about other people, but I'm talking about myself. If I had a weapon, I would feel safer. And it's not about safety.
Yeah, that's all right. Yeah. No, I get you. So look, to be clear, I do not support a total ban on guns, right? I'm not saying that, I'm imposing a gun ban on everyone for all the Americans, who are worried. All I'm saying is that this debate is about, are people safer? That's all, right? So it's not saying that this is worth it. To be honest, I think if I was in a debate about gun rights and people said that it would make people safer in active shooter scenarios, I'd say, yeah, it will. But that doesn't mean that you should take away everyone's guns. Do you know what I mean? So I'm not anti-gun under all circumstances. I actually think that this is one of the least important aspects of the guns and of the gun debate. But this is one of the areas where people would be safer, and it's not worth banning guns for. I agree, right? I would have them regulated like car licenses, and I would make sure that everyone who has a gun, which is trained. But that for this debate, right, which is not the debate on if we should have banned guns or not. This is just the debate on is this situation safer? Then yes, like nobody having a gun would be safer. Okay, so on the straw manning thing, look, I'm not seeing what argument I straw manned. I am really trying to take your arguments at your best. I'm just trying to point out that a lot of them are centered around the way you feel, and you are not the only person in the scenario. So the way other people feel might outweigh the way you feel. So it's not like I can totally agree with what you're saying and just expand the pool of people affected. I suppose what you're trying to say is that you're frustrated that my characterization doesn't line up with the expectations. As in, your characterization is that it works out most of the time. Mine is that there are reasons why it wouldn't. What I'd say here is that I don't think just citing a couple of examples off mainstream media, which you admit is corrupt, which is probably going to lose American viewers if it starts telling stories which say guns could be gone, because as you just like look down to the polling in this debate, right? Like people don't like to be told that guns don't work. So I doubt the situations where it works out the way I'm saying are reported. Media has a limited amount of time to support things. They report things which support the narrative. If they've got donors from the NRA, they're probably not going to report things which disrupt their narrative either. So admitting the mainstream media corrupt is exactly why you can't rely on those scenarios to tell you the full story. What I'm arguing is just plausibly, just rationally, just ask yourself, if you are a burglar with a gun and your aim is, I want to rob the diamond ring from the store, are you more or less likely to start shooting people if you think that they could shoot back, or if you think that they are just going to sit and let you go? And what I would say is you are way, way, way more likely to just take your things and go if there is no reason for you to shoot, because you're not there to shoot people, you're just there to shoot for fun. In the situation you want to talk about, where it's mass shooting, people who are out there to cause as much loss of life as possible, what I'm saying is police who enter under very high stress, low information scenarios are likely to have an easier time identifying the right person and shooting them if they are the only person with a gun and everyone else is running away.
Okay, I've got 2 minutes left, so I'm going to go ahead and say this real quick, and then I'll go to my final words. Responsible citizens should have the right to arm themselves against criminals with guns. Violent criminals will always have guns. Rather than being victims, concealed handgun carriers have a sense of safety and security, especially when going outside at night or in dangerous areas. According to a 2001 study by the National Opinion Research Center, 59% of people who carry a gun outside the home do so because it makes them feel safer. I know you don't care about how people feel, and I don't really either, but hey, that's their right. In Florida, the percentage of concealed handgun permit holders who are female rose from 15% in 2004 to 23% in 2014. One of these female permit holders stated that women, quote, need to be able to defend their home and defend themselves if they get out. It's just a safety issue. In addition, a study by criminologist Gary Kleck, PhD, concluded that, quote, robbery and assault victims who used a gun to resist were less likely to be attacked or to suffer injury that those who use any other method of self-protection were. A peer-reviewed study published by the Journey of Criminal Law and Criminology found that when someone draws a concealed gun in self-defense, the criminal retreats 55.5% of the time. I'm happy to supply those statistics, but I think that it's really, really important that people have the option. And I think that when you constantly paint this as people feeling comfortable, it's not about people feeling comfortable. It's about people having the ability to defend themselves. And when people are able to defend themselves, people feel safer. And the feelings don't matter because you are able to protect yourself. And I cannot think of a single situation that I've heard about lately in the news, and not just mainstream, just any news, that I would have felt less safe if I had known no one in the crowd with me was protected with a firearm. I would have felt less safe.
Okay, so first things first, can I once again clarify? I'm not anti-gun, right? You keep on saying, aha, you got to balance it against people's gun rights. People's gun rights are irrelevant in this debate because I could fully admit that people should have the right to guns, but in this particular situation, they'd be less safe. First thing, you said, look, they'll feel safer, right? I've got all these stats, but then later on in your argument, you're like, feelings don't matter if there is safe or not, which I think you're right the second time, right? It doesn't matter if people feel safer, right? If I lived in America and I had to watch, all of these speeches and news articles all the time with people saying you feel safer with a gun, I would probably be fooled into thinking I'd be safer with a gun as well. That doesn't mean it's true. People can feel things and be wrong. So that's irrelevant. The second part, which I think is true, right? When you're saying about escalation, you said they are safer than if they'd used another method of self-defense. I'm not suggesting they use another method of self-defense. I'm not suggesting that they're saying that they go and sucker punch the person. I'm saying they should run. That would be the best thing. And in most situations where the person just wants to rob the store, why on earth would they shoot someone running away? Like, what? They're just there to get the robber. They're just there to rob a place. So you're yet to give me a reason as to why it would work out the way you said. You said, look, I haven't heard of any stories where it's worked out like that. Well, how much Australian news do you watch? I'm going to guess it's zero. Like, you do? Okay, well, show me the scenario in Australia where someone pulled out their gun in response and it worked out better, because it hasn't happened. Most things in Australia, things don't even make the news because guess what? It's just a robbery story. and that's not exciting as someone got shot. You know, armed robbery, whoop-de-doo, compared to shootout where it got shot, you know, robber got shot, that's headline news. So the news is biased to feed you the stories you want, not the stories which are true. All right, there's about 8 seconds left. I'll hand it back to you.